Hello everyone, my name is the Phawx, and this is my review on the GPD Win 2. I've been trying to think about the best way to start off this video, and I think the best way to do it is to show a quick comparison between the old version and the new version. Very quickly, let's go over some stats. The GPD Win 1 had an X7Z8750, 4 gigs of LPDDR3 RAM at 1600 MHz, 64 gigs of eMMC NAND, 5.5-inch 720p screen, mini HDMI out, and microSD card capable of 35 megabytes a second. The GPD Win 2 has the Core M3 7Y30, 8 gigs of LPDDR3 RAM rated at 1866 MHz, a 128 gig SSD that is M2 2242 form factor, a 6-inch 720p screen, micro HDMI out, as well as DisplayPort out via USB-C, and the microSD slot is rated for 85 megabytes a second. So in this little segment, on the left-hand side you see the GPD Win 1, and on the right side is the GPD Win 2. Now out of the box, the GPD Win 1 runs at 6 watts, and on the right, the GPD Win 2, right out of the box, runs at 7 watts. Now, this is without changing anything, this is just how they run. And I'm going to accelerate this video just so that we're not sitting idly by, because the entire video takes 4 minutes, largely because the GPD Win 1 is not able to get through the benchmark fast enough. And this particular benchmark will highlight the extent of the difference between the Win 1 and the Win 2. But generally speaking, you'll be between 2 to 3 times better performance between the Win 1 and the Win 2. So at this point in the video, you can see that the GPD Win 2 is already finished, and the score is around 180 frames a second. I'm going to go ahead and close this and put it down while I wait for the GPD Win 1 to finish recording, but I'll just spoil it real quick. It basically runs at 65 frames a second. Now, that's not quite 3 times performance, but it's almost there. And as I said before, you should expect anywhere from between 2 to 3 times the performance difference between the Win 1 and the Win 2. In this segment of the review, I'd like to finish up the comparisons between the Win 1 and Win 2 before we start talking about the features and other things that I like about the Win 2. As you can see in the video, I'm using a non-contact thermometer and I'm pointing it at boiling water, and this is just to demonstrate that the thermometer is reasonably accurate. Now, let me take you a step back real quick and kind of let you understand some of the problems that were with the Win 1. Originally, the Win 1 was supposed to have an 8500 SoC. About midway through the Indiegogo campaign, GPD had switched it to the 8700, and as a result, they removed one of the speakers and put a fan in its place. And the fan piggybacked off the power of the display. So if you were to ever turn off the display on the Win 1, the fan went off as well. Now, largely, you wouldn't think that this is a problem, but if you ever wanted to connect your Win 1 to an external display and turn off the display on the device itself, well, then the fan went off as well. This is not something that you want to happen. This doesn't happen on the Win 2. If you turn off the display, the fan will continue to run, so connecting it to an external display doesn't stop the fan from running. Additionally, as we're looking at these temperature readings that we're getting from the non-contact thermometer, we can clearly see that the thermal output problem that affected the Win 1 no longer affects the Win 2. The Win 2 gets slightly warm, but not nearly as hot as the Win 1 does. Now, this is with just default 7 watt settings. If you were to bump up the Win 2 to 11 watt, the device does get a little warmer, but still not quite as hot as the Win 1. Let's segue into some features of the Win 2. Here we can see the USB speeds on the Win 2 itself, as well as the microSD speeds. Now, I don't have the fastest microSD card. The write speeds are atrocious, but the read speeds do still report as 80 megabytes a second, so it's still verifying that we are reaching those speeds. Next, we can see a video of DisplayPort out via USB-C, and this is very important because it outputs at DisplayPort 1.2, so you can get 4K at 60 frames a second, so 4K at 60 Hertz. Unfortunately, HDMI is only 1.4, so you're only going to be able to do 4K at 30 Hertz. Otherwise, you'll be able to do 1080p just fine, but HDMI is just not going to be able to do full 4K for you. Next up is Linux support, and thankfully the 7Y30 already has Linux support right out of the box. The only thing that doesn't work perfectly is the capacitive touchscreen. Now, it works, it's just that it's offset. There is a patch for this already. I haven't tried it. However, everything does work. OpenGL is working, speakers are working, Wi-Fi is working, Bluetooth is working, brightness control is working. You can charge the battery is reporting just fine. Everything works. If you were looking at the Win 2 and wondering if it supports Linux, I can gladly tell you it supports it just fine. In this segment of the review, I want to talk about user mods and user replaceable parts for the GPD Win 2. The first one, being the easiest one, is the user replaceable SSD. Now, this is a great feature that GPD added, and it's a very simple one. It uses the M2 format and the 2242 form factor. It's very quick and simple. It's one screw, pop it out, pop a new one in, off you go. Unfortunately, 2242 drives are a little bit expensive right now, and the drives that GPD recommends is an even shorter list. So hopefully as time goes on and capacities increase, prices come down, we'll see a lot more people buying different types of devices. And I look forward to what the community crowdsources together to find out which is actually the best type of SSD to buy. Now, replacing the battery on the GPD Win 2 is very, very easy. I know I showed a video that a lot of people might find a little concerning on how to replace a battery. They want a very easy battery replacement, just something that clips off and clips back on. As far as it's concerned versus the GPD Win 1, the Win 2 is leagues easier to replace the battery. The 8 screws that hold the Win 2 together and the half part of the plastic pop off and go back on very, very quick. The only part that you really have to worry about is the adhesive that they use to make sure that the battery doesn't rattle around. You do have to pry at that a little. You do have to be careful. I'm not saying that you don't have to be cautious or anything, but it's not a giant concern. Additionally, because the battery that is in the Win 2 should last you a few years. And much like the Win 1, where the community stepped in, where the community is now selling batteries. Lastly, I want to address the user replaceable lid that is on the Win 2 itself. Now, this is an interesting thing, and I'm very curious to see where the community takes this. And we've been discussing this a bit on the Discord forum. There is a possibility that you could store additional storage within the lid itself, 3D print different stuff, attach LTE modems, and then connect it to the USB part. There's a lot of utility that could be found from this replaceable lid, and I look forward to see what the community brings. Now, obviously, the people that are looking at the Win 2 want to play their PC games in a handheld form factor. And how well it plays is as important as how well it performs. And thankfully, GPD has outdone themselves. The analog sticks are the same as they were in the Win 1. The D-pad, face buttons, and trigger buttons are all exceptionally better. I've recorded the analog sticks at 500 Hertz, and when you trigger them into a DPI toggle mode, it will go to 1000 Hertz. The D-pad, face buttons, and keyboard keys all respond at 120 Hertz. I know there was a lot of people concerned about the D-pad being able to press all buttons at once, and I can confirm that that is not the case. It is an 8-way D-pad. You can only press in 2 points at once, meaning the diagonals of the D-pad. Additionally, one other thing that I would like to mention is the rumble feature, and a lot of people were a little bit confused about this. Initially, I was indifferent to it. I didn't really care too much about it at all. But playing games like LA Noire, where it rumbles for the hint system, you quickly learn that the rumble system is a big feature of the GPD Win 2. It's a subtle thing, but once you feel it, you'll understand how awesome it is. So I've been trying really hard to think what I don't like about the Win 2. And there's only one actual negative for me, though there are a few things that I think other people might have a problem with. And the first one being that there are no L3, R3 clickable analog sticks. They are trigger buttons, and there's also L3 on the keyboard as well, which does work for sprinting and crouching where it is applicable. It takes a minute to get used to L3 and R3 because you kind of have to stretch your fingers, but once you do, it's not a huge concern that the analog sticks don't click. The other thing that some people have brought up is it is Gorilla Glass 4. So it is a glossy screen. So in instances where you're playing outside, you may not be able to see it as well as you are inside. Mostly those two don't really bother me. The one thing that absolutely does bother me, and there's an easy fix for it, but it's still an issue that I have to address all the time, and that is the feet for the base of the Win 2 doesn't give enough clearance for the fan to properly breathe. And me being a person that pushes the system to the limit, I push my system to 11 watts. When it's directly on a table, the fan cannot breathe enough to properly cool itself, and it will thermal throttle down. So I have to either prop it up with wires or other knickknacks, or basically make a little laptop stand for it. I wish that the design of the Win 2 had a kickstand built in, so to speak, and I can understand why they wouldn't do that, and why having a laptop stand is probably a thing that everyone is going to do anyway. It's just one thing that is actually a concern of mine. It can be easily fixed with anything that you can kind of cobble around underneath it. So it's not a giant concern. It's just the only negative that I can honestly think of for the device. This is going to be the end of my review. I think the thing that I like about the Win 2 the most is that it has that raw feeling of computing. Those early days of computing, I don't know if any of you were around in the 80s and 90s when you were messing with a computer and you were feeling like you had total control of it. That is how the Win 2 feels. If you want, you can put it all the way down to 1 watt. You can put it down to 2 watts. At 2 watts, you'll be able to get 8 hours of battery life while playing a game, a 3D game while it's just going at half brightness. Now, obviously, we're going to be doing browsing and stuff. It would go way further than that. On the opposite end, you can go up to 11 watts and get an hour and a half, 2 hours of battery life. But by default, at 7 watts, you should get 4 hours of battery life, roundabouts. The keyboard is a joy to type on. I've been averaging about 40 words per minute, and as I use it more and more, it is becoming like second nature to type on this device. I know a lot of people don't really like the design of the Win 2, but honestly, it's really growing on me. Being one of the first people to have the Win 2 is extremely fortunate, and I do encourage you to seek out other reviewers. I don't think that they're going to go as in-depth as I did, but I still encourage you to seek out reviews and not only take my word for it. It may seem like hyperbole, but the GPD Win 2 honestly is as if I had made a wish and it came true. Thanks so much for watching.